The hostel room was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Armin sat on the edge of his narrow bed, his phone dark in his hand, listening to the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the distant sounds of laughter drifting from another floor. Nights like this usually passed unnoticed, but something about this one refused to settle. He had learned that silence could be louder than noise, especially when it arrived uninvited. Armin was 21, old enough to live on his own, young enough to still feel unprepared for the weight of his thoughts. University life had taught him independence, but not clarity. Sharing a hostel room with his best friend, Ayan, had once been a comfort. Lately, it had become a reminder of how different they were. Ayan moved through life with ease, confident, social, certain of who he was. Armin, by contrast, carried questions he rarely voiced, especially about himself. That evening, Ayan had left in a hurry, called away by a last-minute plan with classmates. He promised to be back late. Armin hadn't minded. Solitude had become familiar. What he hadn't expected was the knock on the door just past 9. When Armin opened it, he found Mr. Rahman standing in the hallway, his presence immediately altering the air in the room. Mr. Rahman was Ayan's father, a man in his mid-40s with calm eyes and a composed manner that made people trust him without effort. He visited occasionally when work brought him into the city, always polite, always brief. Tonight, however, he looked tired, his shoulders slightly slumped, as if he had been carrying more than luggage. Ayan's not here, Armin said quickly, stepping aside. He went out. Mr. Rahman nodded, offering a small smile. He mentioned he might. I thought I'd check anyway. He paused, then added, may I come in for a moment? Armin hesitated only a second before moving aside. The room felt smaller once the door closed behind them. Mr. Rahman set his jacket over the back of Ayan's chair and glanced around, taking in the scattered books and half-made beds. His gaze lingered, thoughtful rather than judgmental. You seem quiet tonight, Mr. Rahman said, sitting down. Exams? Armin shrugged. Just tired, I guess. The answer was incomplete, and they both seemed to know it. Mr. Rahman didn't push, but he didn't retreat either. He spoke about his day, about traffic and meetings, his voice steady and warm. Armin listened, grateful for the distraction, surprised by how easily the conversation flowed. It felt strange to be seen by someone older, someone who didn't expect him to perform or explain himself. You always listen, Mr. Rahman observed after a while. That's a rare quality. The comment caught Armin off guard. Praise usually made him uncomfortable, but this felt different, measured, sincere. He nodded, unsure how to respond. The fan hummed on, filling the pauses between their words, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt shared. Rahman's questions grew more personal, though never intrusive. He asked about Armin's studies, his plans, his family. When Armin answered honestly, about the pressure, the uncertainty, Mr. Rahman didn't offer quick solutions. He simply listened, his attention unwavering. For the first time in weeks, Armin felt his chest loosen. You remind me of myself at your age, Mr. Rahman said softly. Always thinking, always holding things in. Armin met his eyes, startled by the familiarity in the statement. He wondered what it meant, then told himself not to read into it. This was his friend's father. A married man. A boundary that should have been clear, yet as the minutes passed, that boundary felt less like a wall and more like a line drawn in chalk, visible, but fragile. Mr. Rahman leaned back, his expression distant for a moment, as if considering whether to speak. When he did, his voice dropped. Sometimes, he said, being responsible means forgetting yourself. The word settled between them, heavy with implication. Armin didn't respond right away. He sensed that this wasn't meant for him to solve. It was a confession, offered without expectation, and that made it intimate in a way Armin wasn't prepared for. He became acutely aware of the room, the soft light, the quiet corridor outside, the fact that no one would interrupt them. His thoughts raced ahead, warning him to steer the conversation elsewhere, to protect what little order he had. But another part of him, quieter and more insistent, urged him to stay. I think, Armin said carefully, we all want to be understood. Mr. Rahman looked at him then, truly looked at him, and nodded. The moment stretched, delicate and charged, neither of them moving. Armin felt a strange mix of comfort and unease, as if he were standing at the edge of something he couldn't yet see. Ayan's empty bed loomed in Armin's peripheral vision, a silent reminder of loyalty and trust. He swallowed, reminding himself why those things mattered. Still, he didn't stand up. He didn't change the subject. He let the silence speak for them. When Mr. Rahman finally rose to leave, the relief Armin expected didn't come. Instead, he felt a subtle disappointment, quickly followed by guilt. Mr. Rahman paused at the door, his hand on the handle. Thank you for listening, Armin, he said. It meant more than you know. After the door closed, Armin remained seated, staring at the space Mr. Rahman had occupied. The room was silent again, but it had changed. He sensed that something had shifted inside him, something he couldn't name or undo. As he lay back on his bed, the fan still humming above, Armin realized that the quiet he had feared was no longer outside him. It had moved in, carrying questions he wasn't ready to answer, and the night stretched on, waiting.
The days after the rain-soaked encounter, Ethan felt a restless tension that refused to fade. Every message, every call from Kofi carried an unspoken weight. Even a simple, "Hey, want to hang out," seemed to vibrate with meaning, reminding Ethan of the shift that had already taken place between them. The line between friendship and something more had blurred, leaving him exhilarated, anxious, and deeply conflicted. Kofi seemed aware of the effect he had on Ethan and, without overt declaration, continued to push boundaries. Small gestures, a hand brushing Ethan's shoulder, a lingering gaze, became more deliberate, more intimate. Each interaction left Ethan both wanting and wary, caught in a storm of desire and guilt. He loved the closeness, yet feared it, aware that crossing the unspoken line could upend everything they had shared. One evening, Kofi invited Ethan to his apartment under the pretext of watching a movie together. The dim lighting, the quiet hum of the city outside, and the soft music in the background created a private cocoon. Kofi sat close, an arm casually draped along the back of the sofa. Ethan felt the heat of proximity, the tension building between them like an invisible current. He wanted to pull away, to remind himself of boundaries, but he found himself frozen, captivated by Kofi's presence. Words were scarce, yet their silence was heavy with meaning. Kofi spoke finally, his voice low and sincere. "Ethan. I don't want to force anything. But I can't deny how I feel." Ethan's chest tightened. He understood the weight of the confession, not in the grand, dramatic way, but in a quiet, unavoidable reality that demanded attention. Their eyes met, and in that shared gaze, Ethan realized just how deeply he had been drawn in, how much he had allowed his emotions to take the lead. Guilt gnawed at him. He thought of his own principles, the trust he had with friends and family, and the societal expectations that weighed heavily on him. Yet, at the same time, he couldn't deny the thrill of connection, the sense of being truly seen and understood by Kofi. He wrestled internally, desire versus restraint, morality versus heart. The tension was suffocating, yet impossible to ignore. Kofi's presence was transformative. His confidence and openness forced Ethan to confront emotions he had long buried, feelings he had struggled to accept even within himself. Ethan realized that the ride, the lingering touches, the shared moments, they had revealed truths about his identity, his desires, and his capacity for intimacy. He began to understand that life was no longer a series of safe, predictable choices. It was complicated, messy, and profoundly human. By the time the night ended, Ethan felt changed. Not because he had acted on temptation, but because he had confronted it, acknowledged it, understood it, and recognized its impact on his life. He and Kofi remained close, yet the nature of their connection had shifted irrevocably. Trust and friendship remained, but layered now with awareness, with vulnerability, and with unspoken possibility. In the following weeks, Ethan reflected on the transformation. He understood that relationships, whether romantic, platonic, or somewhere in between, were not defined solely by action, but by honesty, courage, and self-awareness. Kofi had challenged him to confront his fears, to acknowledge his desires, and to embrace the complexity of emotion without shame. It was a lesson in self-acceptance and growth, one Ethan knew would stay with him long after the fleeting moments of tension had passed. The final scene mirrors the story's opening, but with subtle change. Ethan rides his bike alone along the same suburban streets, the wind still tugging at his hair, the hum of tires on asphalt familiar and comforting. Yet now, each moment carries reflection, the past day's emotional turbulence, the subtle shifts in his understanding of friendship and love, and the awareness that life's most meaningful connections often come with complexity. As the sun dips below the horizon, Ethan slows his bike at the park where he and Kofi had paused so many times. He leans against the railing, letting the breeze wash over him, and thinks quietly, that ride had changed everything, not in ways he could have predicted, but in ways that mattered. Some doors had opened, others had shifted, and his heart, once cautious and hesitant, had been awakened to a truth he could no longer ignore.
Ayan returned on Sunday evening, sunburned and cheerful, filling the room with stories Armin struggled to absorb. He laughed in the right places, nodded when expected, and avoided his friend's eyes whenever the conversation drifted toward family. Guilt settled into Armin's body like a second spine, rigid and unforgiving. He realized then that betrayal did not require discovery to be painful, it hurt simply because it existed. Mr. Rahman did not visit that week. The absence should have brought relief, yet it only sharpened Armin's restlessness. He checked his phone more often than he cared to admit, reading meaning into silence, inventing reasons for it. When a message finally arrived, brief, polite, distant, Armin felt both gratitude and disappointment. The restraint in Mr. Rahman's words made the connection feel real in a way Armin hadn't expected. It was easier to imagine regret than indifference. They encountered each other again by chance near the hostel gate, their meeting unplanned and unavoidable. Mr. Rahman looked composed, almost formal, as if he had rehearsed distance. Armin noticed the effort and understood it for what it was, a decision. Respect, perhaps. Or fear. The knowledge stung more than rejection. "I hope you're well," Mr. Rahman said, his tone careful. "I am," Armin replied, though the lie felt thin. They stood there, two people bound by a truth neither could voice. The conversation stayed safely ordinary, yet the space between them carried everything they refused to say. That night, Armin confronted the cost of what had begun. He watched Ayan sleep, oblivious and trusting, and felt a wave of shame so intense it nearly sent him out of the room. He understood then that secrecy was not protection, it was corrosion. Each withheld word chipped away at something essential. Mr. Rahman's distance became consistent. When they spoke, it was always with purpose and brevity. Armin recognized the pattern and forced himself to respect it. He stopped seeking signs, stopped hoping for explanations that would only complicate matters. Acceptance came slowly, edged with sorrow, but it came in quiet moments. Armin examined his own choices with honesty he had previously avoided. He acknowledged the hunger that had drawn him toward validation, the way loneliness had masqueraded as connection. He didn't excuse himself. Understanding, he learned, was not forgiveness, but it was necessary. The hostel room changed again, reclaiming its neutrality. The silence no longer felt conspiratorial, it felt instructive. Armin began to see it as a space for reckoning rather than longing. He focused on his studies, reconnected with friends, and allowed himself the discomfort of growth. Each small act of responsibility steadied him. One evening, as Ayan prepared to leave for another outing, he paused at the door. "You've been different," he said, not accusing, just curious. Armin met his gaze. "I'm trying to be better." Ayan smiled, satisfied, and left. The simplicity of the exchange struck Armin deeply. Trust, he realized, was fragile but resilient, provided it was honored in time. Weeks later, Armin ran into Mr. Rahman one last time before the semester ended. Their conversation was brief, respectful, and final. There was no acknowledgement of what had passed, only a shared understanding that some lessons required distance to endure. When they parted, Armin felt a quiet resolve settle in him. He packed his belongings the next day, preparing to move to a different hostel closer to his department. The decision felt symbolic, a step toward separating himself from a chapter that had taught him more than he wanted to know. As he closed the door for the last time, he paused, letting the silence surround him. Armin understood now that change did not arrive with drama or declarations. It came through restraint, through choosing what to carry forward and what to leave behind. The moment in that quiet room had altered him, but it did not own him. With that knowledge, he stepped into the corridor, carrying both the weight of his choices and the possibility of becoming someone wiser because of them.